Welcome back everyone, it's Eric from Rare Candy here today on the channel. We are back with another Unbroken Bonds deck profile, and today we have Spiritomb Stunfisk. So this actually is the same list we did feature in our recent testing rounds video, so if you guys want to see how this deck looks in action, I will be sure to have a link down below in the description if you guys want to check that out as well. And if you guys are unfamiliar with those testing rounds videos that we do, they kind of feature some of our early, more like unrefined starting points to begin testing from. So that means there might be a few things in this deck we could potentially tweak or improve upon, just something to kind of keep in mind as we do go through this deck profile here. But let's hop into it and see what this deck is going to look like. So of course, one of the main attackers here is going to be Spiritomb. New card we're getting from Unbroken Bonds, has this ability. Once during your turn, you may put a damage counter on Spiritomb. Doesn't seem too great. Why do you want to damage your own Pokemon? And that's because it has this attack for just a single Dark Energy as 10, plus 30 more for every damage counter on Spiritomb. So you can definitely see the synergy that we have here. And if we just run through the math really quick, if we have all 5 damage counters on Spiritomb, because you do have to remember we have 60 HP, and we can't put 6 on him without being knocked out. But if we have 5, we're going to be hitting for 160, which isn't too bad of a number. But then from there, if we have Choice Band, that's going to be 190. And then we actually have some other ways in this deck to even climb over 200 as well. So Spiritomb, very, very strong little one prize attacker. Only gives up a single prize, only attacks for a single energy. Definitely a strong little guy that we have here. But up next, we have another key attacker in the deck is going to be 3 copies of Stunfisk. So Stunfisk, also another basic single attachment attacker that we have here, is lightning type, so we do have to keep in mind that will allow us to use things like Electro Power, which we do have in this list as well. But has the first attack for just a single colorless energy is 30, and then 10 damage to one of your bench Pokemon. So again, you typically would not want to do this, but if you read Stunfisk's second attack for a DCE, just 30 times the amount of Pokemon you have in play with damage counters on them. So there it is. There's the the whole kind of combo that we have going on here. Spiritomb and the first attack on Stunfisk is going to allow us to hit for some pretty big amounts of damage with this second attack here. And if we run through the numbers on this guy, if we have a full board of Pokemon with damage counters, you're going to be hitting for 180, which is pretty nice because that means with a Choice Band, we're hitting for 210. And then that's not factoring in Shrine of Punishment, Electro Powers, other stuff like that as well. So both these guys are very hard-hitting Pokemon that only give up 1 prize. And I think there's definitely some cool stuff going on here between both of these Pokemon. But we do have some other support Pokemon in this deck. Up next, we have a 1/1 Umbreon line. So this is going to be the Umbreon that came out back in Lost Thunder, I believe it is. So Umbreon here for just a single Dark Energy, does 30 plus 90 more if one of your Pokemon was knocked out during your opponent's last turn. So a nice little like 2-shotting attack. Like if we fall short of taking a big knockout with Spiritomb or Stunfisk, sometimes Umbreon can be nice to come in and kind of clean up without kind of giving up one of our potential like one-hit KO Pokemon that we have here. Also, it's pretty easy to set up just because Eevee has the Energy Evolution ability. Just attach a Dark Energy and you can get going with this Umbreon. But yeah, the initial list that I actually found for this deck, I think played a 2/2 line. That was the Japanese list I found. Honestly, I'm not even sure if I would play a 1/1 going forward. This is definitely one of the more flexible cards in the deck, I think, just because I don't know how impactful it is. The one use I actually really do like for Umbreon, though, is if you see your opponent is playing in a low and muck deck, or a deck that has like a low and muck in it, you can kind of preemptively set up this Umbreon, so whenever your opponent takes a knockout, you can Guzma up Muck and knock it out with Retaliate. So I do like that use, but I'm not sure if outside of that, if it's even really necessary. So this is a potential like cuttable slot in the deck. It's something I'm going back and forth on right now. But up next, we have 2 copies of Jirachi. This is going to be like our main consistency boosting Pokemon since we don't play any Lele's or Marshadows or anything like that. Though I do think you actually could probably play one Marshadow in this deck. That is something I'm kind of considering. But of course, has that Stellar Wish ability here. Look at the top 5 cards of your deck, get a trainer card, and then Jirachi goes to sleep. So just a nice little consistency boosting Pokemon. Especially in a deck like this that is so combo oriented, Jirachi is really nice to have. And then from there, to round out the Pokemon list, guys, we just have one copy of Mew. This is going to be the new one from Unbroken Bonds. And we're playing it for that Bench Barrier ability. Prevents bench damage done to our Pokemon by your opponent's attacks. So that's actually really important, because if we are playing at something like a Buzzwole Pheromosa deck, or even any deck that runs like Tapu Koko promo, they can actually just kind of wreck us, because Spiritomb is always like kind of ticking down and putting damage counters on itself, and they can actually pick off these damaged Spiritombs that way. And having a way to prevent that, I think, is going to be really, really important. Also, Mew's attack isn't terrible. Just for a colorless, put 3 damage counters on your opponent's Pokemon in any way that you like. So not great, but you do have the option of attacking with Mew, especially since it is just a colorless attacker here. So that's going to be it for the Pokemon line, guys. We don't have too many bells and whistles. The Umbreon's really the only, I think, backup attacker. Everything else is going to be pretty straightforward, though. So going on to our trainer cards, we have 4 copies of Lily here. It's going to be our ideal first turn supporter. Draw until we have 6, but if it's our first turn, draw until we have 8. And since we are like an all basic deck, it's usually pretty easy to play our hand down low with this thing. Next up, we have 3 copies of Cynthia. It's going to be our other like primary form of draw support in this deck. Just a nice shuffle in and draw 6. And then from there, we have 1 copy of Professor Kukui as well. So this is going to allow us to kind of climb, over some of those awkward numbers that we sometimes hit with these Pokemon. So like I mentioned, Spiritomb in particular, 190 is decent, but it's a little bit shy of knocking out some of these Stage 1 GXs like Zoroark, just as an example, or Lycanroc GX. So Kukui, very nice there. Also, sometimes in the case of Stunfisk, you can't even get a full bench of damaged Pokemon. I think in my experience, you're usually going to have around 4 to 5. So that definitely does limit your damage output a little bit more. And Professor Kukui can come in and kind of fix that sometimes with the plus 20 damage that it gives you for the turn. But going on, we have 3 copies of Guzma to round out the trainer cards, or I'm sorry, supporters, just to give us some options in terms of what we want to take knockouts on. Next up, we have 2 copies of Shrine of Punishment. So this is going to be one of the other ways we can help fix our math sometimes and get some more damage in play. So 1 damage counter in between turns on GXs and EXs. We play none of which, so it's like a one-sided stadium, which is really nice here. And then from there, we also have 1 copy of Black Market Prism Star. Going to be a very, very powerful stadium, especially when we are going like aggro Spiritomb, because it says whenever a dark Pokemon with dark energy attached to them is knocked out, the player that is knocking them out only gets 1 fewer prize, which means they get 0 prizes for knocking out Spiritombs. So if they are unable to remove the stadium the turn that we play it, we're going to be in pretty good shape, I think. So 1 prize decks are already very powerful on their own by giving up 1 prize as opposed to 2 and 3, and being able to give up 0 prizes while taking big one-hit knockouts is something not to be understated. Going on to our item cards, we have 4 copies of Electro Power up next, just because, of course, like I mentioned, Stunfisk is a lightning type, and this is going to be another card that can allow our Stunfisks to potentially, take some big one-hit knockouts. So let's say we have, let's just say we have 4 Pokemon with damage counters in play. We're hitting 120 with Stunfisk, with a choice band that's going to be 150, with 2 Electro Powers that can get up to 210. Pretty easily as well. That's not factoring in Shrine of Punishment damage, or maybe if we do even have like even more Pokemon with damage on them. But I think that's kind of an average scenario you can expect with Stunfisk here. So it's going to allow us to take those big one-hit knockouts that we need to with this deck. Up next, we have 4 copies of Nest Ball. We are, of course, an all-basic deck, so we definitely want to max this thing out. And we also are pretty reliant on having a full bench at all times, so we definitely want to get down these Pokemon as quick as possible. And because of that, we are actually running 3 copies of Ultra Ball as well. So we're going to lean a little bit heavier on Nest Ball just because everything in here is a basic outside of Umbreon, and Umbreon still comes into play just as easy with a Nest Ball as an Ultra Ball would, just because Eevee can just get an attachment down and immediately evolve into Umbreon. So that's why we are favoring the higher count of Nest Ball here. Up next, we have 2 copies of Switch. So it's going to be one way we can get a little bit more mobility to our board, just to be able to switch our active with one of our bench Pokemon. So especially if we open with something that we don't want, we can switch into maybe like a Jirachi or something like that and continue to get set up and do whatever we want to in a turn. Next up from there, we do have 2 copies of a Skateboard as well. This is going to be mainly for our Jirachis. just to be able to retreat while we're asleep with it. And also in between turns, whenever our opponent may take a knockout, we can, of course, promote Jirachi with a skateboard, use Stellar Wish, then freely retreat into whatever attacker we want for turn. Next up, we have 2 copies of Choice Band. As I've kind of mentioned, this is going to be one of the key cards we're going to use to augment our damage output a little bit. And sure, we can take those big one-hit knockouts. But from there, we do have another damage modifier, and that is going to be Hustle Belt. So this is a card we really haven't seen up until this point for pretty good reason. It's usually pretty bad in most decks. But thanks to Spiritomb, I think this is actually a genuinely viable card, and I might even consider going up to a second one. We'll have to see. But if we have 30 or less HP remaining, our attacks are going to be doing 60 more damage. So that in particular really fixes some of the math issues that we have with Spiritomb. So if we have 5 damage counters on Spiritomb, we're hitting for 160. Well, guess what? With a Hustle Belt, that's going to be 220, which is much better. That knocks out all of these Stage 1 GXs and basic GXs that we have running around. And that's not factoring in existing damage or Shrine of Punishment damage as well. So Hustle Belt, fantastic card here with Spiritomb. And then up next, we have 1 copy of Adventure Bag. So since we are playing 3 different tool cards, this definitely seemed like a good inclusion. Just allows us to search our deck for 2 tools at a time, which is pretty nice. So we can go grab a skateboard and like a choice band in the same turn, which feels pretty nice. And up next, we have 2 copies of Energy Lotto. Look at the top 7, get an energy we find there, put it into our hand, shuffle our deck. So one thing I really do like about this is that it basically makes everything in the deck searchable by Jirachi. So Jirachi, of course, by default, grabs our trainer cards and supporters and stuff like that. But thanks to things like Nest Ball, we can effectively grab Pokemon with Jirachi, and with Energy Lotto, we can effectively grab energy as well. So basically makes everything searchable by Jirachi, which is really fantastic. And then from there, to round out our trainer cards, guys, we have 2 copies of Rescue Stretcher in the deck just for some recovery options. So like I kind of mentioned already, we really want a full bench at all times. I think kind of our ideal board setup is going to be like 4 Spiritomb, a Stunfisk, and Jirachi. And so we basically always need these Spiritombs in play. So you have to think we're probably going to play 1 Stretcher by default just for general recovery. But because our deck does need this full bench of Spiritombs at all times, I think the second copy here is pretty good. So going on to our energy to round out the list, we have 4 copies of DCE for our Spiritombs. We have 4 copies of Rainbow Energy. So we can, get this down to get some extra damage in play. We can put it on Spiritomb to basically give it plus 30 for turn. Or even if we don't want to put it on Spiritomb, one thing I found myself doing sometimes, especially if I'm going first, and I can't attack anyways, I'll actually get down the Rainbow Energy on something like Jirachi or Mew, something that's really not going to be stuck in the active spot, just to basically put a plus 30 damage in play for the rest of the game. So it basically just helps set up our Spiritombs and Stunfisks to do some more damage. And then from there, 3 copies of Dark Energy to round out our list. So yeah, guys, that is going to be our attempt here at this Spiritomb Stunfisk deck. Definitely, I think, a pretty strong non-GX deck that we have here, being able to take big one-hit knockouts with these 1 prize and even sometimes 0 prize attackers is something not to be, I think, undersold on. But also, guys, definitely be sure to stay tuned to the channel. We're going to have a ton of Unbroken Bonds coverage coming up over the next several weeks, so definitely be on the lookout for the rest of our uploads. But as usual, if you can, feel free to like and subscribe, and consider supporting this channel by becoming a patron over at patreon.com/rarecandytcg, or by picking up some merch from our online store, like the playmat you saw in this video as an example. It would mean a lot. But as always, thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.